My name is Ella, and I'm 34 years old. I never expected a simple grocery run would change my life forever. There she was, Sarah, the girl who made my teenage years a living hell, now sitting on a cardboard sign asking for spare change. She didn't recognize me in my tailored suit, but I knew those eyes instantly. In that moment, I had to decide, walk away and let karma do its work, or face the ghost of my painful past. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever encountered a childhood bully years later. Let me take you through how an unexpected reunion with my tormentor led to the most profound lesson of my life. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Millfield, where everyone knew everyone's business and social hierarchies were firmly established generations before I was born. We weren't originally from there. My mum and I moved to Millfield when I was 12 after my parents' divorce. Mum had found a job as a receptionist at the local dental office, and we settled into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Money was always tight for us. Mum worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table, receptionist by day, waitressing on evenings and weekends. I still remember her exhausted face when she'd come home late at night counting tips at our small kitchen table. Despite her exhaustion, she always asked about my homework and made sure I had everything I needed for school the next day. Our financial situation made me an immediate target at Millfield Middle School. Unlike the other kids whose families had lived there for generations, we were outsiders with no connections and no status. I showed up on my first day wearing discount store clothes and carrying a backpack that had been mended multiple times with duct tape. The whispers started immediately. Look at the new girl's shoes. Does she shop at the dollar store? I bet she lives in the trailer park. But it wasn't the general student population that made my life truly miserable. It was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was Millfield royalty. Her father owned the largest real estate company in the county, and her mother was the chairwoman of practically every community organization. The Jenkins family lived in a sprawling house on Lakeview Drive, the most prestigious street in town. Sarah had everything: designer clothes, the latest electronics, and most importantly, power. She took one look at me that first day and decided I didn't belong. What started as subtle exclusion quickly escalated to targeted cruelty. There was the time she accidentally spilled her chocolate milk all over my white shirt during lunch, laughing as she offered a paper napkin to clean up the mess. Oops, actually, the stain is an improvement on that shirt, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Then there was the birthday party incident that still makes my stomach clench when I think about it. Somehow Sarah had discovered that my birthday was coming up. She made a big show of handing out invitations to her own party in the cafeteria, a party scheduled for the exact same day. One by one, she invited every single girl in our grade, making eye contact with me as she skipped over my desk. By the end of the day, I was the only girl who hadn't received an invitation. "Don't feel bad, Smeller," she said, using the cruel nickname she'd created for me after spreading a rumor that I couldn't afford deodorant. "Someone has to not be invited, and it might as well be you." The nickname stuck. For the next 2 years, I wasn't Ella anymore. I was Smeller. Kids would hold their noses when I walked by. Anonymous notes were left in my locker suggesting I take a shower. Someone even gifted me a bottle of perfume for the class secret Santa exchange with a note that said, "Please use this," from everyone. The truth was, I was meticulously clean. Mum had instilled in me the importance of personal hygiene, especially since we couldn't afford new clothes very often. I showered daily, wore deodorant, and made sure my clothes were always freshly washed. But facts didn't matter in the social warfare of middle school. Sarah had declared me unclean, and so unclean I was. The psychological toll was immense. I began having anxiety attacks before school. My grades started slipping. I invented stomach aches and headaches to stay home. My mum worried about my sudden change, tried talking to school administrators, but they dismissed it as normal teen girl drama and suggested I needed to toughen up. The only adult who seemed to notice my suffering was Ms. Jenkins, my English teacher. No relation to Sarah, thankfully. She created a safe space in her classroom, allowing me to eat lunch there instead of facing the cafeteria. She introduced me to books that transported me away from Millfield and showed me worlds where outcasts became heroes. Under her guidance, I discovered a talent for writing, pouring my feelings into journals and short stories. Art became another refuge. I would sit for hours sketching in my room, creating detailed portraits and landscapes that expressed what I couldn't say aloud. Mum scraped together money for a set of watercolours for Christmas, and I taught myself to paint by watching tutorials at the public library after school. The bullying reached its crescendo during 8th grade. Sarah had organised what she called the Smellathon, where kids pledged to donate $1 to charity for every day I wore the same outfit. They created a chart in the girls' bathroom tracking what I wore each day. When I discovered it covered in cruel comments and drawings, something inside me broke. I ran home in tears and refused to return to school for a week. That was when my mum made the difficult decision to move us again. She found a job in a town 30 miles away and arranged for me to attend a different high school. We couldn't afford to move immediately, so for the remaining months of 8th grade, she drove me to and from school every day, adding hours to her already exhausting schedule to protect me from the worst of the bullying. I often wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed in Millfield. Would Sarah's torment have continued throughout high school? Would I have ever developed the confidence I now possess? Or would I have remained forever the girl too afraid to raise her hand in class, too ashamed to make eye contact in the hallway? Those final months in Millfield were some of the darkest of my life. But they were also the catalyst for everything that came next. Our move to Fairview, the neighbouring town, marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Fairview High School was larger than Millfield, with students from several different middle schools mixing together. For the first time since we'd moved to Ohio, I had the chance to be anonymous, just another face in the crowd. I started high school with a strategy: stay quiet, avoid attention, and focus on academics. I'd learnt the hard way that standing out could make you a target. For the first few months, I ate lunch alone in the library, kept my head down in the hallways, and spoke only when called upon in class. But gradually, something unexpected happened. Without Sarah's influence poisoning everyone against me, people actually started to notice my academic abilities. My English teacher praised my essays and encouraged me to join the school newspaper. My art teacher entered my work in a regional competition where I won an honourable mention. Small victories perhaps, but revolutionary for someone who had been systematically made to feel worthless. By sophomore year, I had made a few friends, not a large social circle, but a small group of similarly bookish students who appreciated me for who I was. We formed a study group that met at the local coffee shop after school, pushing each other to excel academically. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be valued for my mind rather than judged for my appearance or economic status. My confidence grew incrementally. I joined the debate team, discovering that I had a knack for public speaking when discussing topics I was passionate about. I became editor of the school literary magazine. I even attended my first high school dance, wearing a dress my mum and I had found at a thrift store and altered together. My grades were consistently at the top of my class, and by senior year, I was being recruited by several colleges. When the acceptance letter from Northwestern University arrived, along with a substantial scholarship offer, my mum cried with pride. We both knew that this was my ticket to a life beyond the limitations of small-town Ohio. College was both thrilling and terrifying. Northwestern's campus in Evanston, Illinois, was beautiful and intimidating, filled with students who seemed so much more sophisticated and worldly than I was. My roommate was from New York City and had traveled to more countries than I had visited states. In my first economics class, I sat next to a guy who had already completed an internship at Goldman Sachs. The ghost of Smeller haunted me during those early days. I showered twice daily, kept a full arsenal of hygiene products, and changed clothes midday if I thought there was even a hint of imperfection. I was constantly afraid that my classmates would somehow discover I didn't belong, that I was an imposter who had somehow slipped past the admissions committee. Trust didn't come easily to me. When study partners suggested meeting up or classmates invited me to parties, my first instinct was always suspicion. What was their angle? Were they setting me up for some kind of humiliation? It took months before I could accept social invitations without anxiety, and even longer before I could initiate plans of my own. Dating was even more complicated. My first serious boyfriend was Mark, a kind-hearted engineering student I met in a calculus class during sophomore year. He was patient with my insecurities, but even his sincere compliments were difficult for me to accept. When he told me I was beautiful, I would scan his face for signs that he was mocking me. When he introduced me to his friends, I waited for the other shoe to drop for someone to pull him aside and ask why he was dating that girl. We dated for nearly 2 years, but ultimately my inability to fully trust him created a rift between us. "It's like there's a part of you I can never reach," he said during our final conversation. "I don't know what happened to make you build these walls, but until you're ready to let someone in, you're going to keep pushing people away." He was right, of course, though it would take years of therapy for me to fully understand how deeply Sarah's bullying had affected my ability to form connections. Academically, however, I thrived. I graduated with honours, majoring in marketing with a minor in graphic design, combining my analytical skills with my artistic talents. My senior portfolio caught the attention of a recruiter from Meridian Marketing, one of Chicago's top advertising agencies. I accepted their job offer a week before graduation, securing a position as a junior account coordinator. The early years of my career were a blur of long hours, challenging projects, and rapid professional growth. I approached each assignment with the same determination that had gotten me through school, working nights and weekends to ensure every detail was perfect. My superiors noticed my dedication, and I was promoted twice within my first 3 years at the company. By the time I turned 30, I had been appointed as the director of the agency's newest division, focusing on digital marketing strategies for nonprofit organizations. I had a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan, a salary that would have seemed impossible to my younger self, and a reputation as one of the rising stars in Chicago's marketing scene. I bought my first apartment in Lincoln Park, a beautiful one-bedroom with hardwood floors and large windows. I filled it with art, some created by me, others by artists I admired. I developed a personal style that was polished and professional, far removed from the discount store clothes of my youth. To anyone looking at me, I appeared to be a complete success story, the definition of having made it. And in many ways I had. I was financially secure, respected in my field, and independent. But inside, I still carried the scars of those middle school years. I still sometimes heard Sarah's voice in my head during moments of self-doubt. I still had nightmares about standing alone in that cafeteria as everyone else received party invitations. I rarely thought about Millfield anymore. My mum had moved to Chicago a few years after I graduated college, taking a position as an office manager at a law firm. We never discussed returning to Ohio, and I had no desire to revisit the scene of my adolescent trauma. As far as I knew, Sarah Jenkins was still there, probably married to her high school sweetheart, probably still the queen of her small-town social circle. Or so I thought, until that fateful day outside the grocery store. It was a crisp October Saturday, the kind of autumn day that makes Chicago feel magical, leaves turning gold and crimson against a bright blue sky, the air just cool enough to justify a light cashmere sweater. I was hosting a dinner party that evening for colleagues and had realized last minute that I was missing a few ingredients for the appetizers I planned to serve. My neighborhood grocery store was an upscale market that prided itself on organic produce and artisanal products. It was the kind of place where you might run into local celebrities or executives from nearby corporate headquarters. I had just parked my car and was walking toward the entrance, mentally reviewing my shopping list, when I noticed someone sitting on the sidewalk near the store's entrance. This was unusual. The neighborhood association generally discouraged panhandling, and security was usually quick to ask anyone soliciting to move along. But there she was, a woman holding a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless. Anything helps. God bless." She wore multiple layers of clothing despite the mild weather, and her hair was partially covered by a faded baseball cap. I almost walked past her, as most other shoppers were doing. In Chicago, you become somewhat desensitized to the sight of homelessness, not out of cruelty, but as a survival mechanism in a city where the problem is so pervasive. I had a system monthly donations to the local shelter rather than giving cash directly, but something made me slow down as I approached her. Maybe it was the way she kept her head down, as if ashamed to make eye contact with those passing by. Or maybe it was simply that she seemed out of place in this particular location. Whatever the reason, I found myself pausing and reaching for my wallet to offer a few dollars. "Thank you," she said quietly as I extended the money, and then she looked up. Time seemed to stop. Those eyes, I would have recognized them anywhere. Despite the weathered skin, despite the hollowed cheeks and chapped lips, despite the years that had clearly been unkind to her, I knew immediately who I was looking at. Sarah Jenkins. The girl who had made my adolescence a living nightmare. The architect of my humiliation. The face that had populated my worst memories for decades. I froze my hand still extended with the cash. A flood of emotions washed over me, shock, disbelief, and yes, a shameful flicker of satisfaction. How the mighty had fallen. The Princess of Millfield reduced to begging outside a grocery store over 100 miles from home. Sarah looked at me without a hint of recognition. To her, I was just another potential donor, another face in a sea of strangers who might spare a few dollars or might walk by without acknowledging her existence. The irony was almost too perfect. "Are you okay, miss?" she asked, noticing my stunned expression. Her voice was different, rougher, with a slight rasp that suggested years of hard living. But underlying it was the same cadence I remembered, the same slight lift at the end of her sentences that had once delivered cutting remarks designed to reduce me to tears. "Sarah," I said, my own voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Jenkins." Her eyes widened and she instinctively pulled back, clutching her sign tighter. "Do I know you?" she asked, wariness replacing the humble gratitude of moments before. A woman exiting the store glanced at us curiously. A small cluster of shoppers had paused nearby, perhaps wondering if there was some kind of disturbance brewing. I was suddenly very aware of how this must look, a well-dressed professional woman having what appeared to be a confrontation with a homeless person. "It's Ella," I said, still struggling to process the reality in front of me. "Ella Garner, from Millfield Middle School." Jay, I watched as confusion gave way to recognition in her eyes, followed immediately by shame. Sarah's face flushed red, and she looked down at her worn shoes. "Ella," she repeated softly, I didn't recognize you. You look different." Of course I looked different. Gone was the insecure girl with second-hand clothes and a desperate desire to disappear. In her place stood a woman in designer boots and a cashmere sweater with a confidence born from years of professional success. The physical transformation was just the visible manifestation of how far I had come from those painful days in Millfield. "So do you," I replied immediately, regretting how the words sounded, not cruel exactly, but not kind either. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Around us, life continued, shoppers coming and going, car doors slamming in the parking lot, the occasional burst of laughter from a group of friends. But in our small bubble on the sidewalk, time seemed suspended as past and present collided in the most unexpected way. "Well," Sarah finally said, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "It was nice seeing you." The dismissal was so familiar, the same tone she had used when terminating unwanted conversations in school. For a split second, I was 12 years old again, being reminded of my place in the social hierarchy, and in that moment, I made a decision that would alter both our lives. My first instinct was vindication, a powerful urge to simply walk away and leave Sarah to the fate she had apparently earned. After all, wasn't this poetic justice? The girl who had tormented me, who had made me feel worthless and small, was now at the lowest point imaginable. I had every right to enjoy this reversal of fortune, didn't I? But as I stood there looking at the shell of the person who had once wielded so much power over me, I felt something unexpected stir within me. Not pity exactly, that would have been condescending. Something more complex, a recognition of our shared humanity despite everything that had happened between us. "Are you hungry?" I heard myself ask, surprising us both. Sarah looked up, suspicion written clearly across her face. "What? Are you hungry?" I repeated more firmly this time. "I was about to get some groceries, but there's a coffee shop next door. We could get something to eat." She studied me as if trying to detect the trap, the punchline to a cruel joke she couldn't quite grasp. "Why would you do that?" she asked bluntly. It was a fair question. Why would I offer anything to the person who had caused me so much pain I wasn't entirely sure myself? "Because I want to know what happened," I said honestly. "And because it's cold out here, and everyone deserves a warm meal." A well-dressed man walking past us muttered something under his breath about encouraging them. Sarah flinched at his words, and something protective flared inside me. "Excuse me," I called after him, my voice sharp. "She's a human being, not an inconvenience." The man quickened his pace without looking back, but the moment had shifted something between Sarah and me. She looked at me with new eyes, not just with shame or wariness, but with a flicker of something that might have been respect. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," I replied, and I meant it. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah gathered her few belongings, a backpack that had seen better days, and the cardboard sign, and stood up slowly as if her body ached. "I'm not a charity case," she said, a hint of the old Sarah's pride surfacing. "I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to," I assured her. "Think of it as two old acquaintances catching up." We walked the short distance to the coffee shop in silence, an odd pair that drew curious glances from passers-by. I was acutely aware of how we must look side by side, my tailored coat and her layered mismatched clothes, my polished boots and her worn sneakers, my healthy complexion and her weather-beaten skin. Two women from the same small town whose lives had taken dramatically different paths. The coffee shop was busy with the weekend crowd. Couples lingering over lattes, students with laptops occupying corner tables, friends chatting animatedly. The barista's smile faltered slightly when she saw Sarah, but she maintained her professional demeanor as I ordered 2 large coffees and a selection of sandwiches and pastries. "Find us a table," I suggested to Sarah, handing her one of the coffees. "I'll bring the food over when it's ready." She nodded and moved toward a table in the back corner where she would be less visible to other patrons. I watched as she sat with her back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room, the posture of someone accustomed to being unwelcome, always alert for potential threats. When I joined her with a tray full of food, she was warming her hands on the coffee cup, inhaling the steam with closed eyes. The simple pleasure she took in something I took for granted daily was a stark reminder of how different our realities had become. "I got a variety," I said, arranging the food between us. "I wasn't sure what you'd like." Sarah looked at the spread with barely concealed hunger. "Thank you," she said stiffly, as if the words were foreign to her. We ate in awkward silence for a few minutes. I noticed that despite her obvious hunger, Sarah ate carefully, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly. There was a dignity in her restraint that I hadn't expected. Finally, when some of the edge had been taken off her hunger, she set down her sandwich and looked at me directly for the first time. "Why are you doing this, Ella? After everything I did to you, why would you help me?" It was the question I had been asking myself since the moment I recognized her. The honest answer surprised even me. "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "Maybe because seeing you like this doesn't feel like the victory I might have once imagined." Sarah winced but nodded slowly. "I'd understand if you walked by, or if you wanted to gloat." "Is that what you would have done if our situations were reversed?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to her coffee cup. "The old me, absolutely. I was terrible, especially to you." She looked up again, her gaze direct despite her obvious shame. "I've had a lot of time to think about the person I used to be. And I'm sorry, Ella. I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry for how I treated you." The apology hung between us, unexpected and almost surreal. For years, I had fantasized about Sarah Jenkins apologizing to me, acknowledging the pain she had caused. But in those fantasies, I had been triumphant, magnanimously accepting her contrition from a position of power. The reality, a sincere apology delivered across a coffee shop table by a woman who had lost everything, was far more complicated. "What happened, Sarah?" I asked finally. "How did you end up here?" She took a deep breath, as if preparing to tell a story she had rehearsed but rarely shared. "It all fell apart during my senior year of high school," she began. "My dad's real estate business had been cutting corners for years, falsifying documents, misleading investors. When the housing market crashed, everything unraveled. There were lawsuits, a federal investigation. He was convicted of fraud and sent to prison." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Overnight, we lost everything. The house, the cars, my college fund, all gone. My mother couldn't handle the shame. She started drinking, then moved to pills. She's in a facility in Florida, now paid for by my aunt." I listened, trying to reconcile this narrative with the image of the perfect, privileged family I had envied from afar. "And you?" I prompted gently. "I couldn't stay in Millfield after the scandal. Everyone who had once claimed to be my friend disappeared when my family's money did. Funny how that works." She gave a bitter laugh. "I moved to Chicago with dreams of starting over, but without a college education or marketable skills, the only jobs I could get were minimum wage. I was working 2 jobs, barely making rent on a tiny studio apartment in a bad neighborhood." She broke off a piece of pastry, examining it before eating it. "Then I met Ryan. He seemed like my salvation at first, charming, protective, promising to take care of me. By the time I realized he was controlling and abusive, I was already trapped. He isolated me from what few friends I had made, controlled all our money, and eventually introduced me to drugs as a way to keep me dependent on him." My stomach clenched at the familiar pattern of abuse. I had worked with domestic violence shelters through my agency's non-profit division and knew how these situations typically progressed. "How did you get away from him?" I asked. "He's in prison now," Sarah replied simply. "Assault charges not related to me. By then I was already addicted and homeless. I've been on and off the streets for about 3 years. I tried rehab twice, but without stable housing afterward, I always ended up back where I started." The stark reality of her situation hit me with full force. This wasn't just a bad patch or a temporary setback. Sarah was caught in a cycle of homelessness and addiction that was notoriously difficult to escape, especially without support systems or resources. "And your family?" I asked. "Is there no one who can help?" She shook her head. "My dad died in prison 2 years ago, heart attack. My mother doesn't even recognize me when I visit. My extended family got burned financially when my dad's business collapsed. They've made it clear they've done all they're willing to do. As Sarah spoke, I found myself wondering about the girl I had known, the queen bee, who had ruled our middle school with casual cruelty. There had been no hint then of the broken woman sitting across from me now. Or perhaps there had been signs I was too young and too hurt to recognize a need for control that masked insecurity, a desperate clinging to status that suggested fear of losing it. "I know you probably think I deserved this," Sarah said, breaking into my thoughts. "Karma, right? The mean girl gets what's coming to her." "I don't think that," I said, surprising myself with the realization that it was true. "No one deserves to be homeless or addicted or abused. Not even you, Sarah." Tim. Tears welled in her eyes, the first sign of vulnerability I had ever seen from her. The worst part is knowing I treated people the same way society treats me now, like I'm invisible, like I don't matter, especially you, Ella. I was so awful to you, and for what? Because you were poor, because you were new, I can't even remember my reasons anymore. "You called me Smeller," I said quietly. "You told everyone I couldn't afford deodorant. You organized a smellathon to track how often I wore the same clothes." Sarah's face crumpled with shame. "I was a monster," she whispered. "I can't believe you're even sitting here with me." "Neither can I admitted. "But I think I needed this as much as you did. To see you as a real person, not just the villain in my memories. To understand that the girl who tormented me was just that, a girl. Not an evil mastermind, just a kid with her own issues who took them out on an easy target." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history and divergent paths settling around us. In that quiet coffee shop, surrounded by people going about their ordinary weekend routines, something extraordinary was happening. The healing of a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged was still open. As we finished our food, I found myself at a crossroads. Our coffee shop conversation could be the end of it, a strange, unexpected closure to a painful chapter of my life. I could walk away feeling better about myself for having shown kindness to my former tormentor. Sarah could return to her spot outside the grocery store with a full stomach and a story about running into a girl she once bullied. Life would continue its separate trajectories for both of us. But something deeper was stirring inside me, a recognition that this encounter wasn't random, wasn't meaningless. It was an opportunity. For what exactly, I wasn't yet sure. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" I asked. Sarah looked up from her empty plate, surprise evident in her expression. "I usually go to the shelter on Jefferson when it gets cold, if I get there early enough to get a bed." I nodded, processing this information. "Listen, I have a proposal," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It's not a permanent solution, but I have a spare bathroom and clean clothes. You could come back to my place, get cleaned up, maybe rest a bit before figuring out your next move." The suspicion returned to Sarah's eyes immediately. "Why would you do that? What's in it for you?" It was a fair question, one born from the harsh realities of life on the streets, where kindness often came with hidden costs. "Honestly," I said, "I'm not doing this for you, Sarah. I'm doing it for me. For the girl I was who never got to stand up for herself. For the woman I am now who needs to know she's capable of compassion even towards someone who hurt her deeply." I met her gaze steadily. "There are no strings attached. No expectations. Just a shower, clean clothes, and a safe place for a few hours." Sarah studied my face, searching for deception and finding none. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Thank you." We walked the 6 blocks to my apartment in silence, an odd pair that drew curious glances from passers-by. I lived in a renovated brownstone with a doorman who raised an eyebrow at Sarah, but said nothing as I nodded a greeting and led her inside. In the elevator, Sarah stared at her reflection in the polished brass panel. "I look like hell," she muttered. "Nothing a hot shower won't help with," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. My apartment, which I had always considered modestly sized by professional standards, suddenly seemed extravagant through Sarah's eyes. I watched as she took in the hardwood floors, the modern furniture, the artwork on the walls, the view of the park from my windows. "You did well for yourself," she said, and I was relieved to hear admiration rather than resentment in her voice. "I've been lucky." I responded, though I knew luck had little to do with it. Hard work, determination, and the resilience forged in the crucible of those difficult middle school years had been far more significant factors in my success. "The bathroom is through there," I said, pointing to a door off the hallway. "Clean towels are in the cabinet. Use whatever products you need. I'll find some clothes that might fit you." I set some boundaries, clear but kind. I have a dinner party tonight, so I'll need to start preparing soon. This isn't an overnight invitation, but you're welcome to rest and regroup for a few hours. We can figure out next steps after you've had a chance to clean up. Sarah nodded, understanding the limitations of my offer. Thank you, she said again with a sincerity that seemed to surprise her as much as it did me. While she showered, I dug through my closet for suitable clothes. We had similar builds, though Sarah was thinner now than she had been in our youth. I selected comfortable items, jeans with an elastic waistband, a soft sweater, warm socks, and practical underwear, still in its original packaging. I heard the shower shut off and placed the clothes outside the bathroom door, knocking gently to let her know they were there before retreating to the kitchen to give her privacy. When Sarah emerged 20 minutes later, the transformation was striking. With her hair clean and her face scrubbed, she looked years younger. The clothes fit well enough, and though she still bore the physical signs of hard living, there was a dignity about her that had been obscured by layers of dirt and weathered clothing. I feel human again, she said, running her fingers through her damp hair. Hungry still, I asked, pulling out ingredients for my dinner party preparations. I need to start cooking, but you're welcome to anything in the fridge. Sarah shook her head. The food at the coffee shop was more than enough, but maybe some water. As she sat at my kitchen island, sipping water and watching me chop vegetables, the surreal nature of the situation hit me fully. Here was Sarah Jenkins, the girl whose casual cruelty had shaped years of my life, sitting in my kitchen, wearing my clothes, looking almost vulnerable. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. How did you do it? How did you go from where you were to all this? She gestured around my apartment. I considered the question carefully. After we moved away from Millfield, things changed. Without you and your friends making my life miserable every day, I could actually focus on school, on developing my talents. I got a scholarship to Northwestern, worked hard, and landed a good job after graduation. But the confidence, Sarah pressed. Where did that come from? You were so shy, so scared all the time in school. The observation stung even after all these years. Because you made me that way, I said more sharply than I intended. I wasn't naturally shy or scared, Sarah. You created that person through systematic humiliation. She flinched but nodded, accepting the truth of my words. I'm sorry, she said simply. I sighed, setting down my knife. The confidence came later. Through therapy, through professional successes, through building a life where I defined my worth instead of letting others define it for me. I looked at her directly. It took years to unlearn the lessons you taught me about myself. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I never thought about the long-term impact. To me, it was just high school stuff. Mean, yes, but not. She trailed off, unable to find words to minimize what she had done. Not life-altering, I supplied. But it was Sarah. It shaped how I saw myself, how I interacted with others, my ability to trust people. The bullying didn't end when I left Millfield. I carried it with me for years. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. If I could take it back, I would. All of it. Every horrible thing I said or did. I believed her. The woman sitting in my kitchen was a far cry from the cruel teenager who had taken such pleasure in my humiliation. Life had humbled her in ways I wouldn't have wished on anyone. As Sarah rested on my couch, dozing after the emotional conversation, I excused myself to make a phone call. In my bedroom, I contacted Dr. Myers, my therapist of 5 years, leaving a message explaining the situation and asking for her perspective. Then I began researching on my laptop women's shelters with addiction recovery programs, job training opportunities for those experiencing homelessness, resources that might help Sarah break the cycle she was trapped in. By the time Sarah woke up, I had a plan. Not a perfect solution, but a starting point. When I presented it to her, a spot in a women's shelter with an integrated recovery program, some new clothes and a prepaid phone so she could make necessary calls, she looked at me with disbelief. Why are you doing all this? She asked, her voice rough with emotion. After everything, I sat beside her on the couch, choosing my words carefully. Forgiveness isn't something I can just decide to give you, Sarah. It's a process, and I'm still working through it. But I do know that helping you now is helping me too. It's allowing me to reclaim some of the power I lost back then. I was firm about the conditions of my help. This isn't unconditional though. You have to commit to the recovery program. You have to do the work. I'm offering you a chance, not a handout. Sarah nodded, understanding the terms. I want to get better, she said softly. I've wanted to for a long time. I just didn't know how to start. Sometimes all we need is a door to open, I replied. You still have to walk through it yourself. As evening approached and my dinner guests would soon be arriving, I called a rideshare to take Sarah to the shelter, where I had arranged a spot for her. Standing at my door wearing clean clothes and carrying a bag with a few necessities I had provided, she looked both lighter and more substantial than the woman I had encountered outside the grocery store. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," I advised. "Thank me by making this opportunity count, by doing the hard work of recovery, by becoming someone who adds good to the world instead of pain." She nodded, understanding the implicit challenge in my words. As she turned to leave, she paused. "You know the universe has a strange sense of humor, doesn't it? All those years I looked down on you made you feel small, and now you're the one with the power to help me." "It's not about power, Sarah," I corrected gently. "It's about choice. We both made choices that led us to where we are now, and we both have choices about where we go from here." As I watched her ride pull away, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged I was carrying until it was gone. The ghost of Smeller was finally being laid to rest, not through revenge or vindication, but through the most unexpected path of all compassion. 6 months passed before I saw Sarah again. During that time, we maintained minimal contact, occasional text messages from the prepaid phone I had given her, updating me on her progress in the recovery program. I kept my responses supportive, but measured, conscious of maintaining boundaries while still offering encouragement. According to her messages, the journey wasn't easy. There were difficult withdrawal periods, emotional therapy sessions that brought up painful memories, moments of doubt when the allure of returning to familiar patterns felt overwhelming. But there were victories too, 30 days sober, then 60, then 90. A part-time job at a coffee shop near the transitional housing where she had moved after completing the initial recovery program. New friendships with women who understood her struggles because they had faced similar challenges. I followed her progress from a distance, always careful not to become too emotionally invested. My therapist had helped me understand that while helping Sarah was a positive choice, I needed to protect my own well-being in the process. "Your healing isn't dependent on her recovery," Dr. Myers reminded me. "Those are separate journeys that happen to intersect." Still, I couldn't deny feeling a sense of satisfaction when Sarah reported reaching significant milestones. Not because I felt responsible for her success. I knew that the hard work was entirely her own, but because it confirmed my belief that people could change, could grow beyond their worst actions and most difficult circumstances. In my own life, things were evolving as well. I had been promoted to executive creative director at my agency, overseeing all campaigns for our non-profit clients. The work was challenging and deeply fulfilling, allowing me to use my marketing skills to support causes I believed in. I had started dating again after a long period of focusing solely on my career, meeting a kind, thoughtful architectural engineer named David through a mutual friend. Most significantly, I had begun speaking at local schools about bullying prevention, sharing a carefully edited version of my experiences, and discussing the long-term impacts of childhood bullying. The response from students and educators had been overwhelming, with many reaching out afterward to share their own stories or ask for resources. It was after one of these speaking events at a high school on Chicago's South Side that I received a text from Sarah that was different from her usual updates. "I saw in the school newsletter that you spoke there yesterday about bullying. I work nearby. Any chance you'd be willing to meet for coffee? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." I was intrigued but cautious. After consulting with Dr. Myers, I agreed to meet Sarah at a coffee shop midway between our workplaces. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman waiting at a corner table bore little resemblance to either the cruel teenager from my memories or the homeless woman I had encountered 6 months earlier. Sarah's hair was styled in a neat bob, her clothes simple but clean and well-fitting. She wore minimal makeup, revealing a complexion that had improved significantly since I last saw her. Most striking, however, was the clear-eyed alertness in her gaze, no trace of the foggy desperation I had seen on the sidewalk outside the grocery store. "Ella," she said, standing to greet me with a tentative smile. "Thank you for coming." We settled at the table with our drinks, a simple black coffee for her, a latte for me. The initial conversation was slightly awkward as we navigated this new dynamic between us. Neither of us was who we had been, not the bully and the victim from middle school, not the successful professional and the homeless addict from our chance encounter. We were two women with a complicated shared history, trying to find a new way to interact. Sarah updated me on her recovery, 6 months sober, now working full-time at the coffee shop, with hopes of eventually moving into a managerial position. She had reconnected with an aunt who was cautiously optimistic about her progress, and she had started taking online classes toward an associate's degree in business administration. "None of this would have been possible without your help that day," she said, her gratitude evident but not overwhelming. She had come to understand through therapy and recovery work that excessive gratitude could be its own form of imbalance in a relationship. "You did the hard work," I reminded her. "I just pointed you towards some resources." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the truth in my statement, while still honoring the significance of my intervention at a critical moment in her life. Then she took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for the real purpose of our meeting. "I heard about the work you're doing in schools," she said, "talking about bullying, its impacts, how to prevent it." She paused, gathering courage. "I've been thinking, what if I joined you sometimes to talk about the other side of it, about being the bully, about the emptiness behind that behavior, about the possibility of change and redemption?" The proposal caught me off guard. Working with Sarah had never been part of my vision for this project. But as I considered it, I saw the potential power in our combined narrative, the full circle story of a bully and her victim reunited years later under extraordinary circumstances, both transformed by their experiences. It would need to be carefully structured, I said, thinking aloud. We'd need clear boundaries, a solid framework for the presentation, and I'd want to try it in a controlled environment first, maybe with a smaller group. Sarah's face lit up at my tentative openness to the idea. "Of course, however you think it would work best. I want to make amends in a meaningful way, not just to you, but to the world. I want something good to come from all the bad choices I made." We spent the next hour outlining what such a collaboration might look like. We agreed to start small, a trial presentation at a youth centre where I had connections, and evaluate from there. We discussed how to present our story honestly without sensationalising it, how to emphasise the lessons without glamorising either the bullying or the addiction. As we parted ways that day, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't anticipated. The idea of working alongside Sarah, of transforming our painful history into something that might help others, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Our first joint presentation took place a month later in front of a small group of teenagers at a community centre. We had rehearsed separately and together, carefully crafting a narrative that was truthful but hopeful, that acknowledged the pain of the past without dwelling in it. The response was powerful students who had never considered the full impact of their actions, others who felt seen in their suffering for the first time. Over the following months, we refined our presentation and expanded our audience, eventually speaking at schools, parent-teacher associations, and even a regional conference on youth mental health. We developed a routine that played to our respective strengths: my organisational skills and public speaking experience, Sarah's raw honesty and hard-earned insights into the psychology of bullying. We weren't friends exactly, the history between us was too complex for simple friendship. But we had developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to preventing others from experiencing what we had endured. The most profound moment in our unlikely partnership came nearly a year after our grocery store encounter, when we were invited to speak at Millfield Middle School, the very place where our story had begun. Walking through those familiar hallways, now as adults with purpose, rather than as children, caught in the cruel dynamics of adolescence, was surreal for both of us. Sarah grew quiet as we passed the cafeteria, where she had orchestrated so much of my humiliation. "I can't believe I was so terrible," she murmured. "It all seems so pointless now." "It wasn't pointless to me," I replied honestly. "It shaped my entire life." She nodded, acknowledging the weight of her actions without trying to diminish them. "That's why this matters," she said, gesturing to the auditorium where students were gathering to hear us speak. "Maybe we can help some kid in there avoid becoming either one of us, the bully, or the bullied." As we took the stage together that afternoon, facing a sea of young faces that mirrored our own from 2 decades earlier, I felt the full circle nature of our journey. The scared, bullied girl and the mean, popular tormentor had both disappeared, transformed by time and experience, into women who had found purpose in their pain. I used to think the opposite of hatred was forgiveness, I told the audience during my closing remarks. But I've come to believe that the true opposite of hatred is understanding. When we truly understand another person, their motivations, their fears, their humanity, it becomes impossible to hate them completely. And understanding ourselves, our worth, our boundaries, our capacity for growth makes it impossible for others' hatred to define us. Sarah nodded beside me, adding her own perspective. And the most important understanding of all might be this, that none of us is just one thing. We're not just bullies or victims, success stories, or cautionary tales. We're all complex human beings with the capacity to hurt others and to heal, to make terrible mistakes, and to learn from them, to lose our way, and to find it again. As we finished speaking and watched the students file out, many of them visibly moved by our story, a young teacher approached us. "I want to thank you both," she said earnestly. "I was bullied terribly in school, and I've always wondered what happened to the girl who tormented me. Your story gives me hope that maybe she changed too, that maybe there's meaning to be found in what I went through." Her words captured exactly what Sarah and I had hoped to accomplish, not just sharing our specific story, but offering a framework for others to process their own experiences of bullying, whether as victims, perpetrators, or witnesses. Back in my Chicago apartment that evening, reflecting on the day's events, I realized how completely my relationship with my past had transformed. The memories of being Smeller no longer had the power to wound me. The anger I had carried towards Sarah for so many years had dissipated, replaced by a complex mix of compassion, respect, and cautious optimism about her continued recovery. Most importantly, I had reclaimed the narrative of my life. What had once been a story of victimization had become a story of resilience, growth, and unexpected redemption. The bullying I had endured was no longer the defining experience of my youth, but rather one chapter in a much larger, richer story. Sarah and I continue our work together, speaking to schools and community groups about bullying prevention and redemption. We maintain appropriate boundaries, connecting primarily around our shared mission, rather than developing a close personal friendship. Some wounds are too deep for that kind of intimacy, and we both respect the limits of what our relationship can be. But there is a genuine connection between us, now a bond forged through extraordinary circumstances, and a mutual commitment to creating meaning from our shared past. We have become, in our own unexpected way, allies in healing not just our own, but others as well. When people ask me about forgiveness, I'm careful with my response. Forgiveness isn't something that can be forced or rushed, and it doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. For me, forgiveness has been a gradual process, a slow releasing of anger and resentment that has freed up space in my heart for more productive emotions. The truth is, helping Sarah wasn't about forgiveness. Initially, it was about reclaiming my own power, about proving to myself that I was no longer that vulnerable girl who could be crushed by cruel words. But somewhere along the way, as I witnessed her genuine struggle to become a better person, forgiveness began to take root organically. That day outside the grocery store could have gone very differently. I could have walked past her, or worse, taken the opportunity to exact some verbal revenge. Sarah could have rejected my help, too proud or too damaged to accept assistance from someone she had once hurt. But instead, we both chose a different path, one that led us not back to our past, but forward into something neither of us could have imagined. Have you ever encountered someone from your past who once hurt you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of healing and transformation. Share this with someone who might be struggling with past hurts or working on forgiveness. Sometimes knowing others have walked this path can make the journey a little less lonely. Thank you for listening, and remember, our past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us.